guys, welcome to this episode of Review Roundup, and I'm dedicating a whole episode to Samurai Warriors 5 because wow, I'm really impressed by it. Before we get into it, I just want to thank our sponsors JList, Crunchyroll and Japan Crate. Also, if you do want to support the show directly, consider tipping us on coffee or by joining the Patreon page, in which for £5 a month you get early access to all of our episodes, whether that's for Kunai, Umai or GALP, as well as ad-free episodes. And finally, before we get into this, thanks to Koei Tecmo Europe for providing a code for this game. I do not know where to start with Samurai Warriors 5. I'm actually excited. We're going to do a lot of content around it, but I just wanted to give you guys my first impressions, and then we will do an episode with Jacob, hopefully in the future, to discuss more in depth about the game, what we thought about it, etc. As well as a special episode with Nathan from Koei Tecmo Europe, in which we're going to be talking about the game in depth. Samurai Warriors 5 is the latest entry into the Samurai Warriors series. The last time we'd seen a Samurai Warriors game, I would say, would be Samurai Warriors 4-2, but in terms of mainline titles, it would have been Samurai Warriors 4, which was released in 2013. So it's a long time, almost 10 years. It's actually been 8 years since Samurai Warriors 4 came out. And I must say, there's a lot of things in this game that are fantastic. I've been disappointed with a few Musou games in the past. You may have listened to our review roundup on the spin-offs, and I really enjoyed those kind of games, but I wasn't really happy with Dynasty Warriors 9, and I was excited for Samurai Warriors 5 from the announcement at the Nintendo Direct earlier in the year. This is just a beautiful game. It's hard for me to describe this, and I know I'm going to be rambling on for this 15 minutes or how long this episode is going to be, but it's astounding. It's just great. I haven't played a Musou game like this in a long time, and for me it reminded me of the Musou games of old. You know, as soon as I booted it up, I was like, oh my god, this game is basically my childhood. I didn't grow up playing Samurai Warriors, by the way. My first Samurai Warriors game was Samurai Warriors Katana on the Nintendo Wii, and that was a very odd motion-based game. It was interesting, but it wasn't the best. I think my first mainline title was Samurai Warriors 4, but I really got into Samurai Warriors because of the Warriors Orochi series. So yeah, I'm glad that I got into it, because if I didn't, I would have missed out on this game, and this is one of my favorite Musou games of all time, because booting it up for the first time, as I was mentioning, reminded me of Dynasty Warriors. I'm not sure if you guys played the older Dynasty Warriors games, Dynasty Warriors 5, Dynasty Warriors 4, that sort of generation of Dynasty Warriors. It just reminds me of that a lot. The map design is very reminiscent of that. The maps aren't too big like in Dynasty Warriors 8 or in Dynasty Warriors 7, but at the same time, they're not as small as in Samurai Warriors 4. In Samurai Warriors 4, you had this issue in which the maps were so small because of hypertacks and things like that. You didn't really need to use a horse to get anywhere. It was easy to get to objectives, things like that, and the game just felt incredibly easy. But when playing Samurai Warriors 5, I've noticed that Koei bumped up the difficulty, and in fact, when you boot the game up for the first time, it recommends that you play the game on easy. And you know what, me being me, having how many years, almost 20 something years of Musou experience, I was like, you know what, I'm not going to play it on easy, and I didn't. I played it on normal, and I was like, damn, this game is incredibly hard. There were moments in this game where I was getting on red life bar constantly, even from the start, because of the difficulty, and I love it. The game hands your ass to you. There is a level of challenge that reminded me of the older games, Dynasty Warriors 4 particularly, which is a very difficult game, especially in the early stages if you don't have a proper setup. And this game was basically like that. When I had to face Yoshimoto Imagawa for the first time, I was shocked, obviously by the character designs, but also how difficult it was to defeat him. You had a system in which there was multiple health bars, a regen life system, things like that for the enemies, and these were systems that were introduced in previous games. Like I said, Dynasty Warriors 4, Dynasty Warriors 5. So it's nice to see those things return, and it makes me think that the new development team at Omega Force were fans of the older games. So the games that they didn't create, they were probably playing them as they were younger, as they were kids, and they brought that energy into Samurai Warriors 5, and it's paying off. There was a lot of things in terms of game mechanics that I didn't necessarily enjoy from previous games. I really liked hyper attacks, but I felt as though in Samurai Warriors 4 and even in the Warriors Orochi series is that they can get overpowered very quickly. And the lovely thing about this game is that hyper attacks are there and they serve as a secondary moveset in some cases. Because the map sizes, you can't really rely on hyper attacks to get around the map quickly. You'd have to use your horses, which is good, and I think that's the intended purpose of the horse. Also, also you can't just go through every enemy type with a hyper attack. You're going to get stopped. In Samurai Warriors 4, you could just go through the whole map just doing hyper attack. It was getting incredibly boring doing that, but in this game you have to face different enemy types. There are some enemies that have shields, which basically block hyper attacks as if you're fighting a boss, or enemies that are preparing to shoot, whether that's arrows or guns, or enemies charging spears and whatnot. So hyper attacks aren't as useful. They are still quite powerful, but they're not as useful and they're not as OP, which is good because you're relying on your ability in the game, right? You're relying on your personal skills, how to deal with the situations yourself. Yes, there is no dodge mechanic like in Samurai Warriors 4. In Samurai Warriors 4, there was a mechanic in which if you pressed X as you're doing a combo, you can actually cancel the combo and do a dodge forward or dodge backward or side to side basically, and it would take a part of your Musou gauge. They've removed that, and I think that's a good thing because you really need to rely on Musou in this game, much like the older Dynasty Warriors games. Musou doesn't regen, which we haven't seen in a Musou game for a while, but there are skills that help Musou regen, ultimate skills as they call them, which is basically something I believe that came from Dynasty Warriors 9. It was a feature that was implemented in Dynasty Warriors 9 and in One Piece Pirate Warriors 4, in which you press R1 and then you'd press one of the face buttons to do a attack that you would equip in the menus pre-battle. It's pretty interesting because you can decide what you want according to your playstyle. If you want an attack boost, if you want a defense boost, if you want to regen Musou, if you want to do a special attack that's unique to that particular character, you can do all sorts of things. And even within that, if you're finding certain enemy types very difficult to fight against, you can use that to help you a little bit. There are specialized attacks for enemies with shields or enemies with spears and whatnot. And usually for my playstyle, what I tend to do is I always equip the attack because you're going to need it with certain boss battles. Musou regen, and I do 2 unique abilities as well. In some cases, it really depends on the character. When the game was announced, a lot of people were complaining, oh, clone moveset, it's not that good, and what happened to all the characters? This game has a reduced number of playable characters, mind you. It's done for a reason. It's to get a more focused story, because when you had all of these characters, whether it was Dynasty Warriors or whether it was Samurai Warriors or even Warriors Orochi, you find yourself not playing as the other characters. And I didn't have that with this game, and I was actually excited to play as all the characters and to unlock all of these characters. When you have so much characters in a Musou game, when you unlock them, it seems meaningless. You don't really want to go and play them. You're like, oh, you know what, forget about them, I'm gonna do this or whatever. And when you unlock a character like Oichi, or if you unlock Yasuke or someone like that, and it makes you feel like, oh my god, this is a new character I've never seen before, I'm gonna play it, or I'm gonna have them as my partner in battle, and so I can experience their weapon type. The weapons have changed in this game. Some are inspired from other Musou games, some are inspired from Samurai Warriors, but they all have new movesets. Yes, these movesets are cloned between characters, and in fact any character can select a weapon. They just have to increase their weapon efficiency. So for example, if Nobunaga's main weapon in this game is the long sword, but later on in the story he basically gets a second preferred weapon, which is the katana. And it happens with a few characters. I think the only characters that have 2 preferred weapons, Mitsuhide and Nobunaga, obviously because they are the main characters in this game. But that doesn't mean you can't select other weapons with them. For example, if you wanted to equip the gloves for Nobunaga, you could do that. Or if you wanted to have Mitsuhide using the drum, the taiko drum, you could do that as well. And I thought that was quite hilarious. There's certain weapons that seem funny at first, but then when you see them in the context of the game, it makes a lot of sense. Like for example, Hanbei, I get confused between Hanbei and Kanbei, but Hanbei uses the drum, and I was like, oh, why is Hanbei using a drum? Doesn't make much sense. But the moveset is quite intuitive, and it does remind me of his yo-yo that you would see in previous games, right? It was pretty cool. I liked stuff like that. And even within those types of weapons, the movesets vary between characters. So for example, similar to Dynasty Warriors EX attacks, the base moveset is the same, no matter what weapon or character you use. But then they have individual attacks that are different, similar to EX attacks in Dynasty Warriors, but also, once again, does remind me of Dynasty Warriors 4 or Dynasty Warriors 5, in which multiple characters had clone movesets, but they would have a level of uniqueness to that moveset to kind of differentiate differentiate them between the other characters. And that's what you see here. That's why I keep on saying that it reminds me a lot of Dynasty Warriors 5, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a very welcome thing in Musou. It's actually put a change to the game. And like I said, I'm a big fan of this idea of reduced roster size, because you get to enjoy characters a lot more. You get to form bonds with these characters and whatnot, and actual relationships with these characters, which is great. We're just going to go on a little bit of an ad break. When we return, we're going to talk a bit more about the Citadel mode and things like that. So stick around for the second half of the review roundup, where we're talking about Samurai Warriors 5. See you in a bit. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people at JList. JList brings you the latest anime and otaku goods from Japan directly, whether that's anime, manga, cosplay, import game, visual novels. JList has got you covered. Learn more at getalifepodcast.com/JList, and remember to use our link and the code GALP for 5% off on all purchases on JList. That's including pre-orders. Remember, getalifepodcast.com/JList. Thank you very much, JList, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the podcast. And you're like, oh my god, Bish, what are you talking about? Well, basically, we started off a Patreon page and a Coffee page. So go to patreon.com/GetLifePodcast and pledge £5 a month, not including VAT. You get early access on all of our GALP content. That's Kunai, GALP, and Umai. Although we won't be able to do it for review roundups because of embargoes and stuff. And also, you get ad-free content on all the episodes. So if you're listening to this, obviously you're not subscribed on Patreon, please do. And if you're thinking, oh well, Bish, I really want to support the podcast, but I can't, do monthly payments or whatever, then maybe consider supporting us on Coffee as well. So that is ko-fi.com/GetAlivePodcast, and consider giving us a tip, buying us a coffee, if you will, and hopefully that will help us to grow the podcast. It will help us to do this full time, because ultimately that's really what we want to do. I'm being honest with you guys. When you support us directly through Patreon or Coffee, it really does help us out a lot, and I do appreciate it. So thank you. Hopefully you might consider that is patreon.com/GetLifePodcast or ko-fi.com/GetLifePodcast. Thank you, and back onto the episode. And we are back. Speaking of relationships and bonds, there is a new mode in this game called the Citadel mode, which is effectively like a tower defense mode mixed in with Musou. You may have seen these sort of modes appear in previous games in Warriors Orochi. I would say it's similar to Warriors Orochi's Musou Battlefields / the Samurai Warriors 4-2 Castle mode, which was basically just going through these infinite levels. But these have specific tasks to do. It's not like procedurally generate. It's good to a certain point, but it tends to be very similar. Like, it's basically a challenge mode, like protect the base and whatnot. There isn't really anything different. The maps are different. The maps tend to be a lot smaller. It tends to be more difficult sometimes depending on which mode you're doing, because sometimes the base that you're protecting, the doors are wide open, or there'll be multiple entry points, and you're preventing the enemies from taking that base down. The main reason to play this mode is to just get materials that you need to upgrade your castle, which acts as your main menu. Like, it has your shop, your blacksmith, dojo, and the stables. So by completing the Citadel mode missions, you get resources that help you upgrade your castle and whatnot. Kind of like ambition mode in Dynasty Warriors 8, if that makes any sense. But obviously it takes away the whole walking around pseudo open world system, which I think is good as well. Like I said, even the menus themselves remind me of the old school Dynasty Warriors 5 game, because it was just like no frills. It was basically no frills, but it was good because it got you where you needed to be. Yes, Musou mode returns in official capacity. It's not known as story mode anymore, which is good. It's nice to see Musou mode returning. Free mode also returns, but it does it in a quite an interesting way. So you have your linear story, and at one point you get access to Mitsuhide's story, which is basically starts off mirroring Nobunaga's story, and then it changes across in a path. But even within Nobunaga's story and Mitsuhide's story, you get the option to do side missions as well. In which you kind of get to experience other characters that you may not have played as, or you get to see glimpses into Ieyasu's story or Hideyoshi's story. And obviously it kind of gives you a little bit more backstory into what's going on with the battle, especially in the later game, in which you're fighting at Honoji or whatever. The side missions basically focus on what Hideyoshi was doing at that time, what battle was he fighting, and what battle was Ieyasu fighting as well, which is good. It's nice to see those contrasting stories, and it doesn't take away from Nobunaga's overall story. It kind of gives you a little bit of backstory without taking the spotlight away from Nobunaga or Mitsuhide, which is always good. I will say this, there are some things in the story that doesn't make much sense, and I don't want to get into spoilers because I don't think I can, but the game isn't historically accurate. And you may be thinking, well, Bish, Samurai Warriors and Dynasty Warriors was never really intended to be historically accurate. And yeah, that is true, but sometimes I find myself noticing that there are characters that aren't supposed to be there in that particular point in history, or they're not supposed to do that particular event, or they weren't in that particular battle. Once again, does remind me of old school Dynasty Warriors 4 and 5, where you'd have like Cao Cao in the Battle of Wuzhang Plains, or you'd have Sun Jian in the Battle of Cherbi, and he probably would have been dead at that point. So it's stuff like that kind of appear in this game, and I understand why they did it. It's probably to make the story flow better, and you understand certain motives behind Nobunaga's thinking or Mitsuhide's thinking as well, and you kind of understand the characters a bit more. And I feel that it was made as a decision, but part of me thinks, knowing the Japanese history, reading up on it, learning about it, because this is something that I kind of learned at university as well, reading it and then playing it, you get a bit confused. You're like, well, that didn't happen in history, and it puts you off a little bit, but the game brings you back in with its interesting storyline and the way characters deal with each other and stuff like that, because you don't really get to see. That's another thing that I love about this game. When you read a lot of history books, or even if you watch a lot of documentaries, you don't get to see how these characters interact with each other, and in most cases Koei are going to have to take some creative liberties in making these relationships work, especially with Nobunaga and Kicho, or Ieyasu and Senna, his wife. So there is a lot of things that aren't necessarily known, and Koei has to fill in the gaps, and I think in those cases they've done a great job, and it made me really connect with these characters a lot more, especially characters that I never really used to like in the previous games, like Ieyasu. I used to hate Ieyasu in previous games because his weapon was always really clunky. It was that weird lance cannonball thing, and his character design wasn't appealing. And in this game you see a different style of Ieyasu, right? He's not this grumpy shogun, you know, he's younger, he's learning. You get to see him progress through this game. You get to see how his actions change, how his thoughts and feelings change as well, and also how he treats other people and how he respects other people. You also see it with Takarasu Honda as well. He's very bubbly and upbeat, and in previous Samurai Warriors games he's like, you know what I mean? He's very, I wouldn't say aggressive, but he's like very stern, and it's nice to see that contrast, because part of me thinks that this is how they would have been, especially someone like Ieyasu. When he was younger, he was probably a little bit naive, didn't know what he was doing. He refers to Nobunaga as brother because he respects Nobunaga, and you get to see that. And I don't think you really got to see that in previous games because the story was just so long, in the sense that you didn't really get to focus more on a particular storyline. It was like Nobunaga's story is like 5 missions in like previous games, right? And in this game it's a ton of missions. There's 6 chapters for Nobunaga's story, and maybe like 5 missions in each chapter, and side missions as well, maybe 2 or 3 side missions in each chapter. So the story, I think, is well structured. You get to learn more about the characters, and I mentioned briefly, character design in this game is beautiful. I love the new design. It feels like calligraphy in a sense. It looks like someone actually went in with a brush, a calligraphy brush, and done outlines for these characters, and it's beautiful. Kind of like a woodblock print, the way that the outlines just pop, and it's beautiful. I like that, and I want to see it moving forward in future Samurai Warriors games. I just also like the fact that everyone's young, and there's no character that just looks out of place. Everyone looks young. Well, not everyone looks young. I'd have to say that there are some characters that look a bit older because they are older and they kind of serve as advisors. Characters like Hanzo Hattori, for example, he's got that sort of daddy look to him, if that makes sense, which is pretty cool. But you also see that with a bunch of other characters. You see them a lot more younger, youthful, energized, if that makes sense. And then towards the end of the game, you get to see the mature versions of Mitsuhide and Nobunaga, and you get to see the contrast. Their voices change slightly as well, their weapons change, and their attitudes change because they've seen some things, and obviously the battles that they've gone through, and all this kind of stuff. And it's good. Big fan of the new character designs, and I'm a big fan of the fact that they reduced the number of characters. I will say this, there are some characters that I feel didn't need to be added to the roster, like Nobuyuki Oda looks like a generic NPC, or like a Create a Warrior NPC from Empire's games and stuff like that. It's the same with a lot of the Saito clan as well, I have no reason to really play as them because they don't seem as remarkable as, you know, your main characters like Nobunaga and things like this. And their character designs are pretty basic. I would have wished that they would have cut those characters out or maybe included them as unique NPCs like in previous games, because I have no interest in playing as Nobuyuki, especially because Nobuyuki isn't there for most of the game. So I have no interest in playing as Nobuyuki, so there's really no point in putting Nobuyuki in there. That being said, we're just going to go on a little bit of ad break. Remember, if you are subbed on Patreon, you're not going to listen to this ad break, and we're going to go straight back into the review. So we will see you on the other side if you're listening to the ad break. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Crunchyroll. Go and check them out at getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll for a 14-day free trial of Crunchyroll premium service. That means anime without ads, 1080p HD. You can watch it on all your favorite devices, your TVs, your phones, whatever. Even if you want to watch it on your Chromecast, you can as well. That's amazing. Go and check them out. 14-day free trial. You've got the most diverse collection of anime and manga on the internet. So go and check them out. It's a no-brainer, lads. getlifepodcast.com/Crunchyroll. Thank you, Crunchyroll, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by the lovely people at Japan Crate. Japan Crate offers a unique experience of Japan through monthly crates filled with candy, and who doesn't love candy, right? Japan Crate brings you a delicious selection of snacks every month. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. Learn more at getlifepodcast.com/Japan Crate. Remember, use the code GALP for $3 off on new subscriptions. So, getlifepodcast.com/Japan Crate. Use the code GALP for $3 off. And if you want to check out what snacks that you get in the crates, go and check out our YouTube channels. Links will be in the description, so go and check them out. Thank you, Japan Crate, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Okay, we are back, and I don't know, there's not much for me to say. Like, I just love this game, and I think I'm going to get more into it with Jacob, but I think for me, this is a game that's going to stand the test of time. I'm hoping Koei uses this game as a basis moving forward. I will have to say this. When playing the game, I kind of had a feeling that either we're going to get DLC with more story beyond Honoji, or we were going to get completely separate games for Hideyoshi and Ieyasu. And I think probably we're going to see like a Samurai Warriors 5-2 or Samurai Warriors 6, in which we cover Ieyasu and Hideyoshi in one game, similar to this. And I like to see that. I think that would be cool. I did check the DLC and the season pass content, and it seems quite interesting, but at the same time, it feels as though it's like what if missions, if that makes sense, or more fun missions than not anything that has, you know, prevalence to the story, if that makes sense, which is a bit disappointing. I would have liked to have seen more historical missions in the game, but these fun missions are always great to see because then you get to see more of the characters that you don't really get to see much of in the game and whatnot, which is cool. I will say this though, I really want to see Koei use this as the basis for future Warriors games, not just Samurai Warriors, but I want to see Dynasty Warriors made in the same way like this. And this is a conversation that we're going to have in the episode with Jacob. I just want to see that. I think that's really beneficial to the series. I did like the fact that they reduced the roster. I don't know how it's going to work for Dynasty Warriors, but I think that is something for Koei and Omega Force to find out. And I'm really just happy with the amount of effort that was put into this game. Is it the perfect Musou game? No, because no game is perfect. But at the same time, I think it is very close to perfect. It can be grindy at times, especially with the Citadel having to go back and forth doing those missions. And there are certain things with the blacksmith that I don't necessarily enjoy. I haven't figured out how to properly get the most out of the blacksmith, having to upgrade and waiting for castle upgrades in the game, basically having to progress through both stories to actually get to a point where you can do meaningful things, craft new weapons, etc. I was expecting a weapon crafting system similar to Warriors Orochi, in which you can fill in blank spots into new weapons and assign anything you want. Maybe you can do that, but I haven't figured out how to. I know you can fill in blank spots with, you know, gems and things like that you get, like attack up, you know, Musou plus, which basically strengthens the Musou and things like that. Like, that's very Warriors Orochi, and that's pretty cool, but I didn't really see the need to do that. A lot of the time I was just recycling weapons for gold, selling weapons, basically getting back the orbs and things like that, and just selling, because gold in this game is such a commodity. Sometimes I find it's very difficult to get until the later game, which makes sense, but there's certain things I don't necessarily like. The fact that You can, if you have enough gold, you can basically buy weapon mastery, you know, totems and things like that basically allow you to level up your proficiency in weapons. They should just allow you to do that to begin with. I don't see the need to buy those totems. The same with skill points. Why do you need to buy skill points? That's something I don't understand. I think it should have been done in which you gain more skill points per character, similar to Warriors Orochi, right? You gain skill points per character as you level up that character, as opposed to skill points being shared across all different characters, and the ability to buy skill points so that you can basically get all these characters leveled up as quickly as possible, gain a lot more skills and stuff like that. I understand the reason why they do that. It's so that you can jump into any character, especially because the Musou mode may give you characters that you've never played as before. You're not always going to be playing as Nobunaga. You might get a mission in which you play as Kanbei and Hanbei, and if you haven't leveled them up or if you've never played them before, yes, I do understand why they included that and the benefit towards that. That makes sense, but I just don't like the skill tree itself. Is pretty similar across all characters. There isn't much that is unique, which is quite disappointing, to be honest with you. Like, it's very basic things like health plus 15, things like that. On occasion you do get unique skills for that character, which is nice, but I would like to see certain attributes added to the character as well, like added proficiency in a weapon or adding a unique moveset to a particular weapon. I would have liked to see more with the skill tree. It's quite easy to complete, especially if you buy skill points. I would have liked to see a little bit more of a challenge. Yes, with Mitsuhide and with Nobunaga, when you get their older versions, there is a extra skill once you complete the skill tree that is basically a unique skill, but it's not that useful anyway, to be honest with you. It's just one skill. I would have liked to see more with the skill tree, although I do like how it's structured. It's a nice feature to have them shaped as the Mon or the family crest of that particular character, which is nice. I like these little touches in the UI design and things like that, and I think it's good. Overall, I do think that Koei's done a cracking job on this game, and I am looking forward to the future, and yeah, I think it's a good game. Before I end this, there is another thing that I would say that I have a little bit of a gripe with, and that's the fact that there isn't much in terms of customization of characters. What do I mean by that? I mean like the ability to change costumes. I would have liked to have seen different costumes in the game. I do understand that technically the game does separate characters like Nobunaga into two, so you have younger Nobunaga and older Nobunaga. They don't really need to do that as a costume change because their movesets are slightly different depending on what weapons you use. Their elemental attacks are different, etc. So technically it's the same character and they have the same progression, it's just their moveset is slightly different. But I would have liked to see more costumes that aren't DLC, because it would be nice to see them put in the old costumes. I do know if you pre-order the game, you do get some costumes for Nobunaga and Mitsuhide, but I would have liked to see old school costumes for Kicho and Poshimeda, maybe Ieyasu. I think it might be hilarious just to see Ieyasu wearing his old costume in the game. I think that would be really funny to see that. But yeah, I would like to see more of that in terms of DLC. I'm not too impressed with the DLC offering for this game, just because it's just, oh, new weapons and new horses. That's pretty much standard. It's kind of cosmetic at some points. Yes, there is more missions in this DLC in the season pass, but I really wanted to see more costumes. I don't know why, but in Musou games recently, we're not seeing as many costumes. Yes, the character models are changing, so you know, it might be a bit more work to introduce old costumes. I get that, but maybe give us some more original costumes, maybe some fun costumes, maybe more traditional military costumes for the Sengoku era, maybe Hideyoshi wearing his classic helmet, stuff like that. I think I would have liked seeing that, and possibly DLC characters. I mean, there are some characters that are included that I think should have been in the game. Like I mentioned, I didn't want to see Nobuyuki there because it's just like, why is Nobuyuki in the game? He's only in like a couple of missions. He should have just been a unique NPC, when we could have got a character like Natora E, for example, you know, head of the E clan. That would have made sense. I think that would have made sense, especially the fact that her and Senna are related through the Imagawa family. That would have been a huge thing, especially because there are other E family members and some family retainers in the game as NPCs, and I would have loved to have seen more female characters like Natora E. Would have been great to see. Oh, that rhymed. That was quite nice actually. But yeah, it would have been nice to see that. It also would have been nice to see more of Yasuke. I think Yasuke is a great character, but I feel as though he doesn't get as much time in the game, just because he's only in the last chapter thereabout. Pretty overpowered character, love him as a character, reminds me a lot of Yan Wei. Yeah, it would have been nice to see more of Yasuke. It would have been nice to see more of Yasuke after as well, because there are some battles that occur after Honoji. Anyway, that being said, that was a whole episode dedicated to the review of this game. I want to end it by saying this: if you are a fan of Musou games, even if you just play Dynasty Warriors, play this game. Even if you don't like Samurai Warriors, even if you don't like Sengoku era, play this game. You're not going to regret it, because this is a game that's basically the Musou games of old. It's god level Musou game. You owe it to yourself to play this game. Music's fantastic, new character models, new characters, new weapons, new take on a classic story filled with ups and downs, twists and turns. Play this game. Go and buy it right now. The game is already out. It's on the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, PC, Xbox One. It's also backwards compatible if you are playing on the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X. It runs beautifully on the PlayStation 5, by the way. I have been playing it on the PlayStation 5. Works really well with the DualSense controller. I don't know if it is necessarily fully compatible with it, but I love that. And the load times when you're playing on the PS5 is pretty quick. It's fantastic. I haven't seen a Musou game run so smoothly before, period. Buy the game. It's out now. You're not going to regret it at all. And stick around for the episode that we're going to be doing with Jacob, the more in-depth episode where we're going to be talking about our favorite missions, our favorite characters, what we thought about the story, and how do we see Koei take this forward for a franchise and possibly introduce it into Dynasty Warriors. In addition to that, we are going to be doing an episode with Nathan from Koei Tecmo Europe, in which we talk in further detail about Samurai Warriors and how awesome the game is. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed making it, and I really enjoyed Samurai Warriors 5. Bye bye.